Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss one of the latest Brexit reports, which decides to focus on the reality of our post-Brexit trade deals and how they could never replace the trade we've lost with the EU via our extreme Tory Brexit. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I've actually carried out similar exercise to this myself in the past. A year or two ago, I looked at the government's own economic impact assessment for the post-Brexit trade deals they arranged. I then worked out what would happen if we got the same quality of trade deal with every other country in the world, apart from, of course, EU countries. This included the massive markets of the United States and China, which are not interested in a trade deal with us at all. But I made the assumption that Tory Brexiteers would charm the pants off everyone and get these free trade agreements with every non-EU country around the world. You added up the boost to UK GDP that these global trade deals would give us, and it was still less than we lost in trade with the EU. And there were two reasons for this. The first is that free trade agreements that we've been arranging are extremely poor. Take a look at this chart in a new report by the Centre of European Reform. It shows the GDP benefits of trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand individually and the CPTPP as a whole. And it uses the government's own economic assessment figures. It then shows the GDP cost of Brexit, not even coming close to compensating. For all Kemi Badenoch's desperate attempts to label the CPTPP as this hugely lucrative market to tap into, more so than the EU, simply not true. In fact, when it comes to the CPTPP, there are several reasons why membership, better than nothing, which is what we'd otherwise have, is really nothing to get excited about. First of all, the other members are all thousands of miles away. So trading goods and face-to-face services is going to be expensive due to transport costs and time. And trade in remote services doesn't get much of a boost from the arrangement. The CPTPP is also a much weaker trading bloc than the EU. It's essentially, a giant free trade agreement, but with caveats. But despite the fancy sounding name, a free trade agreement is actually a little better than no agreement at all. It's actually, in terms of trade deals, in terms of lowering trade barriers, free trade agreements are the weakest of all trade agreements you can get. And we already had free trade agreements with most of the members and all of the wealthier members of the CPTPP. But the second reason why these calculations a couple of years ago showed that we couldn't compensate for Brexit with better trade deals elsewhere is most of the world doesn't have that much money to spend. Not as much. Europe's is a very wealthy market. The US and China are huge, but both are incredibly protectionist, and there's zero chance of us getting any trade deal even remotely as beneficial as the one we had with the EU. In fact, there's zero chance of us getting an EU level of trade deal anywhere in the world, because that was genuinely free trade. So the fact of the matter is, there isn't enough money being spent around the world to compensate for the trade we've lost with Europe. Even if far-flung countries wanted to buy more of our goods and services and found some extra money down the back of the sofa, it's not mathematically possible to compensate for the GDP cost of Brexit. No way of coming up with a model of even hypothetical trade deals that can be a boost to GDP by more than Brexit shrinks it, that aligns with the reality of the trade deals that we have agreed. This Centre for European Reform makes the point that though you would, of course, keep pursuing free trade agreements with as many countries as possible, they are better than nothing, they cannot allow you to compensate for Brexit. They make the point that many others have, that how much trade one market has with another is proportional to the size of the markets and inversely proportional to the distance. So, you go back to the CPTPP, our membership's not going to pull trade away from the much closer and larger markets of Japan and China for most of the rest of the members. But we could see our trade boosted significantly if we joined the huge market on our doorstep, the EU single market and customs union. Huge market, right next door to us. There is a reason why we are the first country in history to actively seek to raise trade barriers with our closest and most important market. No other country in history has been that stupid. The dumbest thing countries have done in the past, which have had the effect of damaging their trade, is starting unnecessary wars. The Tories managed to screw over our trade without even decimating the younger generation this time. Sometimes you see the odd pro-Brexit article that complains at British businesses not taking advantage of the new Brexit freedoms. This report gives a little insight into that as well. It notes that our trade deal with Australia, for example, technically relaxes some requirements for maritime transportation, but that it is of little benefit because it's not going to be in the interests of either the UK or the Australia to change regulations just to unlock those small benefits from this free trade agreement. That is because Parliament would need to make changes to maximise some of the perks in a trade agreement. And unless the trade benefits are significant, it's not worth it. It's not worth the effort. Not going to do it. So there can be things in a trade deal that sound good in practice, like, oh, that would allow these businesses to do that, but won't ever materialise because it requires some change in regulation. And Brexiteers do get this in reverse. So I can only conclude that they're deliberately ignoring this. For example, Brexiteers are quick to point out that the Australia trade deal doesn't mean we're importing hormone-treated beef into Britain. But the trade deal does allow for it. The reason we're not importing any is because we haven't actually changed UK regulations to permit it. It has nothing to do with the trade deal and everything to do with our domestic regulations. Well, the same is true of hypothetical benefits in a trade deal that Brexiteers do want to push. If it's just a reduction in a tariff schedule, fine, that takes place. But if it's something that requires the other market to change their laws, and they don't, it doesn't matter that the trade deal theoretically provides some benefit. Until the other market changes their regulations, you won't be able to take advantage of it. And we're finding that I did the video last week on beef imports and exports between Australia and the UK. Australia massively increased their beef exports to the UK. We have not sold so much as a box of beef jerky to Australia, and we've tried because we can't get through their regulations. The trade deal allows it. We can't physically sell the beef to Australia because we cannot get through their regulations. They haven't changed anything for our benefit. The bottom line is trade deals were never going to make Brexit worthwhile. In fact, the madness of Brexit is that actually when you look at a lot of the things, if not all of the things that Brexiteers sold to the public as benefits are actually drawbacks. They're costs of Brexit. The idea of arranging our own trade deals is not a benefit of Brexit. It's a downside. If there were benefits of Brexit that outweighed the drawbacks and you went ahead with it anyway, one of the drawbacks you'd have to accept is we have to make our own trade deals. That's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. The arguments on sovereignty were a cost. Leaving the EU has meant choosing whether or not we adopt EU rules, which is what Brexiteers focus on. Absolutely. We have that choice. Do we adopt EU rules now or do we not? But it has removed our right to decide what those rules are. So all we can now do is choose whether we follow them or not. And invariably, the answer will be, yes, we will follow them, because if we don't, we screw over our own economy and our own businesses, our own workers, with unnecessary and uncalled for divergence. Immigration was also a cost. Losing the ready workforce on our doorstep has meant trying to attract more workers from Africa or Asia, qualifications and training less compatible with those in Europe. So that has meant we've needed more immigration in order to maintain a certain level of productivity. Leaving the EU for reasons of immigration actually increased it, as we have seen from the data. The Tories have now trapped themselves into making it harder for foreign students to come here just to try and reduce the figures somehow. But what do foreign students do? They spend loads of money in our economy. They effectively subsidise British students and then go home. The result of this now is that fewer British students will be able to study at university because the courses cannot run on the money they bring in. Foreign students were subsidising us. Many depend on a certain number of foreign students to make the finances work. Absolutely everything that Brexiteers presented as a benefit has turned out to be a cost. And the reason we're struggling more than even Brexit should be making it necessary is because the Tories still haven't latched onto this idea. They still don't get it. They're still working on the principle of delivering what they themselves said would be benefits, even though they're actually costs. And so the more they try to push for them, the more they find it's actually doing damage And so what they have to do is to try and find what they call pragmatic solutions. But these pragmatic solutions in their case have not been a different way of doing things. It's the same way, but just massively watered down, not to improve things, but just to reduce the extra damage they're going to cause. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.